November 19th, 1944, 0520 hours. Outside Épinal, eastern France. Frost hanging in the air like wire. Staff Sergeant Marcus Wright of the 761st Tank Battalion crouches behind his Sherman, breath clouding, checking the tread tension one last time before dawn breaks. His crew, Johnson on the gun, Davis driving, Monroe loading, moves in practice silence. They've been in combat for 3 weeks straight. 0 mechanical failures. 0 missed objectives. Across the staging area, a British liaison officer watches through binoculars, stone-faced. He's seen the reports, doesn't believe them. Wright tightens the last bolt, stands, meets the officer's gaze across 50 yards of frozen mud. The Brit lowers his binoculars, nods once, just once. Wright climbs into the turret. They roll at 0530. Competence doesn't ask for acknowledgment, it earns it. If you're here for the real history they didn't teach in school, the kind that changes how you see everything, hit that subscribe button. You won't regret it. The expectation was clear, encoded in policy and assumption. Black soldiers were laborers, not warriors. Support, not combat. Muscle, not mind. Executive Order 8802 had opened defense jobs to black Americans, but the military remained rigidly segregated. Separate units, separate facilities, separate blood supplies. Despite the fact that a black physician, Dr. Charles Drew, had pioneered blood plasma storage. The Red Cross labeled donations by race. The irony was bitter, deliberate. Of the roughly 1.2 million black Americans who served in World War II, the vast majority were relegated to service and supply roles, quartermaster companies, port battalions, construction units. When combat roles opened, they opened grudgingly under pressure, with skepticism baked into every order. They were expected to fail, or at best, to perform adequately under white supervision. They were not expected to excel. March 24th, 1945. Skies over Berlin. P-51 Mustang, tail number 41. Second Lieutenant James Holloway checks his 6, scans the horizon, keeps his fingers light on the stick. His Red Tail Squadron, 332nd Fighter Group, is escorting B-17 bombers deep into Germany. This is the 73rd mission he's flown. He hasn't lost a bomber yet, neither has his squadron. The bomber crews know it. They request the Red Tails by name. The Tuskegee Airmen, they're called, trained at a segregated base in Alabama where white instructors expected them to wash out, where the town of Tuskegee enforced Jim Crow with casual violence, where excellence became the only language that mattered. Holloway spots the glint. Luftwaffe fighters, 2 o'clock high. He doesn't radio, doesn't need to. His squadron knows. They break formation, intercept, engage. The bombers don't even adjust course. They know they're covered. When Holloway lands back at Ramitelli, his crew chief hands him a Coke and grins. 73 and oh, sir. Holloway takes a long drink, sets down the bottle, picks up his pilot goggles, scratched, sweat-stained, irreplaceable, and tucks them into his pocket. 74 tomorrow, he says. The military's racial policies were a study in contradiction. The Selective Service Act of 1940 prohibited racial discrimination in the draft, but the Army maintained separate units. Black soldiers trained at segregated bases, often in the South, where local Jim Crow laws applied on and off post. Officers' clubs were white. Mess halls were divided. Base theaters had separate entrances. Black officers, rare, closely watched, faced hostility from white subordinates and superiors alike. The Army opened officer candidate schools to black candidates only after sustained pressure, and even then, quotas kept the numbers minimal. The Navy restricted black sailors to steward roles, serving meals, shining shoes, until late in the war. The Marines didn't accept black recruits until 1942, and then only under presidential directive. Yet the manpower needs were undeniable. Total war demanded total mobilization. By 1945, approximately 1 in 10 service members was black. They served as truck drivers, engineers, medics, cooks, longshoremen, and, when the doors finally cracked open, tankers, infantrymen, pilots. They served because it was duty, because it was America, however broken, because proving competence was the only path to recognition, and because refusal to serve would confirm every lie ever told about them. July 1943, Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, 2,300 hours. The men of the 761st Tank Battalion, the Black Panthers, stand at attention in the sweltering heat, fresh from 8 months of training. They've outperformed every metric: gunnery scores, top quartile; mechanical proficiency, exemplary; tactical exercises, flawless. Their new commanding officer, a white lieutenant colonel named Paul Bates, walks the line slowly. He's read their files. He's seen what they can do. "Gentlemen," he says, voice level, "you're going to face 2 enemies overseas. One wears a German uniform, the other wears ours." Nobody moves. They've heard versions of this speech before. "The first enemy," Bates continues, "we'll defeat with firepower and maneuver. The second, we'll defeat with performance. Every mission, every objective, every day. You will be judged by a standard no one else has to meet. That is unjust. That is reality, and you will exceed it anyway." He pauses at the end of the line, turns back. "Your country doubts you. Prove it wrong." 6 months later, they're in France, attached to Patton's Third Army, punching through the Siegfried Line. December 31st, 1944. Tillet, Belgium, 0400 hours. 14 degrees below freezing. The 761st has been in combat for 70 days without relief. No rest, no rotation, just mission after mission, in the frozen mud of the Ardennes. Staff Sergeant Wright's tank crew has been awake for 36 hours. The Germans hold Tillet, a Belgian crossroads village crucial to the Allied advance. Intel says the position is heavily fortified. Command says, take it anyway. Wright's company moves out in darkness, engines growling, treads chewing frozen earth. At first light, German 88mm guns open up. The world becomes noise and impact. Wright's driver, Davis, swerves hard left, avoids a direct hit by inches. Johnson, the gunner, returns fire, silent, focused, his hands moving like a watchmaker's. They push into the village, house to house, tank to tank. The Germans don't break easy. By 1600 hours, Tillet is secured. The 761st has lost 2 tanks, 7 men wounded, 0 retreats. A white infantry captain approaches Wright's tank as the crew refuels. He's from the 87th Division, been fighting beside the 761st for weeks now. "Your boys don't quit," he says. Not a question. Wright climbs down, wipes oil from his hands. "Wasn't optional, sir." The captain shakes his head, almost smiling. "I wrote my wife. Told her the best tankers I've seen are the ones nobody wanted." Wright pulls his Red Ball Express patch from his pocket. Traded off a supply sergeant weeks ago. Good luck charm now. Runs his thumb over the stitching. "Told you so," he says, quietly. If the 761st was the spear, the Red Ball Express was the arm that thrust it. Between August and November 1944, this truck convoy system, staffed predominantly by black quartermaster companies, delivered 493 tons of fuel, ammunition, and supplies to Patton's Third Army as it raced across France. The convoys ran 24 hours a day, often under fire, often without sleep, navigating bombed roads and improvised routes. Drivers logged 16-hour shifts, 18-hour shifts, 20 when the mission demanded it. Trucks broke down. Drivers repaired them on the roadside and kept moving. Ambushes happened. Convoys fought through or rerouted and kept moving. Without the Red Ball Express, Patton's advance stalls in Normandy. The war in Europe lasts longer. Thousands more die. Yet the drivers returned to segregated bases, ate in separate mess halls, were denied promotions that white logistics officers received for identical work. Private Leonard Morrison, a driver from Alabama, wrote home in October 1944, "We haul the bullets that win the war. Then we go to the back of the line for chow." Funny how that works. It wasn't funny. It was policy. February 22, 1944. Anzio Beachhead, Italy. 0230 hours. Lieutenant Clara Hayes, Army Nurse Corps, works by flashlight in a field hospital tent. German artillery pounds the beachhead every 30 minutes, regular as a heartbeat. Wounded pour in. Shrapnel wounds, burns, amputations needed, shock, hypothermia. Hayes is one of 16 black nurses assigned to this unit. They treat white soldiers, black soldiers, German POWs. Blood doesn't segregate when it's spilling onto a surgical table. A shell lands close. The tent shudders. Hayes doesn't flinch. Her hands stay steady as she ties off a bleeder, calls for plasma, moves to the next man. A white surgeon, Captain Ellison, glances at her across the table. He's from Georgia. Didn't want black nurses in his unit. Said so explicitly when they arrived. "Lieutenant Hayes," he says now, voice tight. "That's the third save tonight." She preps the next patient, doesn't look up. "Yes, sir?" "I was wrong about you," Ellison says. Hayes meets his eyes just for a second. "I know, sir." She has her nursing cap pinned inside her footlocker, starched, immaculate, earned at a segregated training program where the director told her she'd never work in a real hospital. That cap is her credential, her proof. Nobody questions her competence anymore. Not here. Not when it matters. You're watching history that Hollywood won't touch, stories that textbooks bury. If this matters to you, and it should, subscribe now. Don't let this vanish again. Not all white officers were hostile. Some were exceptional. Paul Bates, commander of the 761st Tank Battalion, fought for his men relentlessly. When the battalion was denied leave after months of combat, Bates protested to division command. When supply requisitions were delayed, replacement parts that white units received immediately, Bates bypassed channels and requisitioned them himself. When the 761st was recommended for a presidential unit citation after the Bulge, the recommendation was quietly shelved. Bates spent years after the war petitioning the Pentagon. The citation was finally awarded in 1978, 33 years late. Bates wasn't a saint. He was a professional who recognized that competence was colorblind and that prejudice was a tactical liability. His men remembered him. At his funeral in 1995, veterans of the 761st attended from across the country. They carried his casket. They saluted a man who had led them, not despite their race, but because of their ability. The alliance was rare. It mattered. British civilians didn't enforce American segregation. Pub owners in rural England served black soldiers the same as white. Families invited them to dinner. Children played with them in the streets. This enraged white American MPs who tried to enforce Jim Crow in British towns. When pub owners refused to create separate areas, MPs threatened arrests. The British didn't comply. One pub owner in Lancashire posted a sign: "This establishment serves any Allied serviceman with courtesy and respect. If you can't abide that, leave." White soldiers did leave. Black soldiers stayed, drank with British soldiers, talked with locals, experienced for the first time in their lives a version of normalcy. Private Eddie Thomas, 92nd Infantry Division, wrote home from England, "People here treat me like a man. Not special, not inferior. Just a man in uniform. I didn't know what that felt like till now." It made returning home harder. Returning to Alabama, to Georgia, to Mississippi, to places where the uniform didn't matter, where service was invisible, where dignity was denied. The contrast was unbearable and instructive. The Pittsburgh Courier, a black newspaper, launched the Double V campaign in 1942. Victory abroad over fascism. Victory at home over racism. Black soldiers carried that tension with them. They fought for a country that didn't fully claim them. Liberated people who had more freedom than they did. Defended principles their own government violated. Letters home captured the paradox. Corporal William Jones, serving in France, wrote his sister in Atlanta, "We fight for democracy. We don't live in it. But maybe if we fight hard enough, we'll earn it." That calculus, service as proof, combat as credential, was exhausting. It was also the only path visible. Morale was complex. Pride in mission coexisted with anger at treatment. The Double V wasn't just a slogan. It was survival strategy, moral framework, psychological necessity. The white officers who saw this tension and dismissed it missed the point. The ones who saw it and respected it earned loyalty that outlasted the war. April the 5th, 1945, Freeman Field, Indiana. 161 black officers of the 477th Bombardment Group attempt to enter the Officers' Club at Freeman Field. Base policy, illegal under Army regulations, but enforced anyway, reserves the club for white officers. The black officers know the reg. They've read it. They enter anyway. Base Commander Colonel Selway orders their arrest. 101 officers are placed under house arrest. 3 are court-martialed. The charges don't stick. The case is too public. The regulations too clear. But the message was sent. Challenge segregation. Face consequences. The Freeman Field officers chose conscience. They knew the cost. They paid it anyway. This wasn't mutiny. It was insistence on the dignity they'd earned. It was the logical extension of every mission flown, every objective taken, every mile driven under fire. If we're good enough to die for this country, we're good enough to drink a beer in its officers' club. The military didn't agree. Not then. Field commendations came first, unit citations, medals for valor, though fewer than performance warranted. General Patton, no friend to integration, publicly praised the 761st after the bulge. "I don't care what color you are," he told them. "So long as you go up there and kill those kraut sons of bitches." It wasn't enlightenment. It was pragmatism. But pragmatism was progress. The Tuskegee Airmen's escort record became impossible to ignore. Bomber crews requested them. Fighter Command studied their tactics. The narrative shifted slowly from "can they fight" to "how did they fight so well?" Black nurses received Bronze Stars. Black medics received Silver Stars. Black infantrymen received Distinguished Service Crosses, though the Medal of Honor remained elusive. Not a single black soldier received the Medal of Honor during World War II. That injustice wasn't corrected until 1997, when President Clinton awarded 7 Medals of Honor, 6 posthumously, to Black with II veterans. Recognition came. Late, incomplete, but real. The soldiers knew the gap between what they'd earned and what they'd received. They carried that knowledge home. May 8, 1945, VE Day. Somewhere in Germany, Staff Sergeant Marcus Wright sits on his tank, listening to the radio broadcast. The war in Europe is over. Churchill is speaking. Eisenhower, Truman. Johnson, his gunner, leans against the turret, smoking. "We going home now?" Monroe asks. Wright looks at his hands, oil-stained, calloused, steady, hands that loaded shells, repaired engines, signed after-action reports, hands that proved something. "Yeah," he says, "but it ain't gonna be the same." "Same how?" Davis asks. "We can't go back to being what they said we were," Wright says. "Not after this." It wasn't a decision. It was a recognition. The war had changed them, not just in skill, but in understanding. They'd seen what they could do, seen what they were worth, seen respect, even if limited, even if conditional. They couldn't unsee it. First Lieutenant Eugene Richardson, 92nd Infantry Division, said years later in an oral history, "We knew we'd proven ourselves. We knew it wouldn't be enough, but we also knew we'd never stop demanding what we'd earned." The equation had shifted. Service plus competence equals recognition. Not immediately, not completely, but inevitably. They'd pay the bill, but they'd collect the debt. They came home to ticker tape parades in some cities, silence in others. They came home to the GI Bill, which promised education and home loans, but which Southern banks and universities systematically denied to black veterans. They came home to Montgomery, to Tulsa, to Detroit, to places where the uniforms stopped mattering the moment they crossed the county line. Some went to college on the GI Bill when access was granted. Some became teachers, lawyers, activists. Many joined or founded NAACP chapters. Veterans of the 761st marched in Selma. Tuskegee Airmen spoke at sit-ins. Red Ball Express drivers organized voter registration drives. The competence they'd proven in war became the foundation for the civil rights movement. The discipline they'd learned in combat became the discipline of non-violent resistance. The courage that carried them through the Bulge carried them through Birmingham. Staff Sergeant Marcus Wright became Marcus Wright Sr., high school principal in Philadelphia. His son, Marcus Jr., became an attorney, argued housing discrimination cases. His grandson enlisted in 1991, served in Desert Storm, came home to a country still imperfect but undeniably different. The lineage of service continued. The demand for recognition continued. The fight was long. The fight was generational. The fight was not in vain. They were not supposed to succeed. They succeeded anyway. They were not supposed to fight. They fought and fought well. They were not supposed to earn respect. They earned it in blood, sweat, fuel, and fire. The thesis was always simple. Courage and competence shatter prejudice. Service demands recognition. Not immediately, not without cost, but inevitably, undeniably. Black soldiers in World War II didn't just fight a war. They fought a lie. The lie that said they were less. They proved it false with every mission flown, every mile driven, every life saved, every objective taken. The system resisted. The system adapted. The system did not break easily, but it broke, slowly, over decades, because the proof was irrefutable. Somewhere in a small apartment in Philadelphia, Marcus Wright Sr. keeps a drawer in his dresser. Inside, dog tags from the 761st, a faded Red Ball Express patch, a photograph of his crew standing beside their Sherman, frozen mud in France, exhausted and unbroken. He doesn't open the drawer often, doesn't need to. The proof is in the service. The service demands the recognition. And the recognition, however delayed, is the beginning of justice. This is the history they don't teach. The history that matters. If you want more, and you should, subscribe. This story doesn't end here. Service is the credential that cannot be revoked.